Following our last panel on moving the needle in regional Australia, where we looked at the skills, resources and the magic that's sparking across regional Australia, particularly for women in startups, it's time to meet and engaging co-host and CEO of Agridigital, Emma Weston. I want to thank you all for joining us. You're welcome, Emma. Sorry, should have paused there. We want to thank you all first off for joining us for this fireside chat, absent a fire, and where Emma and I are going to sort of discuss how Agridigital, for instance, is helping thousands of farmers access capital with their unique use of innovative blockchain technology, and her thoughts on the future of agritech and finance, both domestically, nationally, and internationally. My name's Catherine Lytle, and I've got a 33-plus year career in financial services, in derivatives, in technology and operations at sort of MD and C-suite level. And I've spent the last 18 years in London, and I maintain a business in the UK alongside all my current Aussie interests. I'm an investor, I'm a board advisor, and I chair in several companies, and I'm an independent non-executive director on Fintech Australia, who's hosting this panel today. I've long been an advocate for greater diversity in markets, and through my interests in Seismic Founder in the UK and Seed Space Venture Capital here in Australia, I frequently get to have very detailed conversations with startups about what good governance, good culture, strong values, transparent ethics look like. So I was very delighted to be invited to chat with Emma here today. Emma, the agrarian revolution saw the transformation of British agriculture during the 18th century. Common land was enclosed. There was technological innovations like seed drills, crop rotations, etc. Since then, we've undergone an industrial revolution, and now we're at what could be described as the early beginnings of a very transformative technological revolution. And in between, very sophisticated agricultural hedging products were developed by exchanges such as Chicago Board of Trade and New York Board of Trade. And it's enabled producers and consumers to hedge their risks across all these staple products, no matter where they were grown, as they were being transported globally. So your business, Agridigital, is solving for one of the biggest challenges I think COVID-19 has thrown at us, how to ensure supply chains remain stable and unbroken. And this is doubly challenging in remote markets where technology isn't as embedded across the value chain in ag versus, say, other industries. So Agridigital it's a multi-award winning platform. It's leading the way in digitizing and connecting and securing that agricultural global supply chain from farmer through to consumer. So a question for you, as CEO, and you lead in all aspects of the business, right? Strategy, stakeholder engagement, the product, the platform, overseeing all the sales, the blockchain, the technology, all the operational environments. Can you start by just sharing with us what Agridigital does and the specific problems that you're solving for?
Sure, thanks, Kathy. It does sound like a lot when we put it that way, and certainly been quite a journey that I've been on, but that agriculture has been on generally. There's been a lot going on through all of those revolutions, as you said, and we now have the ability through digitization to look at how we use data and how we actually democratize access to capital in particular. So that's very much the mission that we're on at Agridigital. I've got two co-founders, so I don't do it alone, and we've got a team of about 35, 40 people. And really, we've really come together just to be very, very simple about it. We want to make grain supply chains easy. So at the moment, we exclusively work in the grain supply chain. It's a very traditional commodities supply chain. It's global, largely in nature, because it's been involved in high levels of domestic production in certain countries where grain can be produced, and then that grain is exported and obviously processed and made into food. And so what we're really focused on at Agridigital is not necessarily the large players servicing the large players of the global supply chain. It's actually the small to medium enterprise. It's the heart of supply chain, the heart of business, and looking at why we don't have a thriving SME sector in supply chain and in the grain supply chain in particular. And we really hit on, there were two main reasons to that. One, that there was not good technology that was both highly functional as well as easy to use, let alone accessible from a cost perspective. for SMEs. And the second thing was that SMEs tended to be underfinanced or completely unfinanced. So they did not have balance sheet strength to draw upon. They did not have external sources of validation of their balance sheet or their financial strength, such as a share price, for example. And this was really stopping them accessing capital. So at Agridigital, what we do is we have built out a platform that digitizes the supply chain. So it's all operational aspects of the supply chain, whether you're a farmer, whether you're a processor, a trader, a storage operator. It doesn't matter who you are in the supply chain. You can now come to one digital platform in order to transact all of your supply chain activities. So that's quite revolutionary in and of itself, I suppose. And the second thing was that the reason we needed to build that supply chain technology was we didn't actually have access to a uniform and validated data set that we could then leverage to access capital markets and to bring much needed liquidity into the sector. And so although our real mission might be bringing liquidity in, and that's what I guess we might talk a lot about today, given the knowledge that you have and that you bring to the conversation as well, Kathy. But the fact is we wouldn't be able to do that if we didn't digitize the supply chain first, and if we didn't actually connect everyone across the supply chain so we could leverage that data set.
Brilliant. It's a really compelling offering, Emma. I was very excited to learn of it and to find out more about it. There's a lot of and I will get into some of the what's out there that's a competitor or a collaborator going in a minute. But there are many industries currently in the throes of moving away from traditional business models, and supply chains, as a whole, are no exception. And agri supply chains have that added challenge, if you like, of try to transport very seasonal, time-sensitive products that can deteriorate if they're not stored or transported properly. And you've got additionally some very large global conglomerates that have pushed the industry away from that more traditional collaborative mindset to one that's more characterised, I think, as you said to me the other day, competition and control were the words you used. So I think this flows right through to the customer experience when you think about those of us who live in the city and the very large vendors who use their buying power to sort of buy up all the products at low wholesale prices and turn them around and sell them back to us here in the city at higher retail prices. And so you touched on this, but could you just go into what's your niche in that SME space, and how do you see the excess of Agridigital impacting the overall ecosystem going forward? Because I think what you're doing is quite powerful, and it won't just stop in that SME space.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that's we already actually have some very large customers who use Agridigital, so there's certainly size is not an object, or no reason not to be able to use Agridigital. But the reason for the focus on the SME sector was we wanted to build a solution that was equally applicable to farmers as it was to large processors, to large global players. And so thinking about the logic and, just at the product level, the user experience that needed to be built out, we really focused in on that SME sector. And of course, SMEs or indeed large corporates are really just bundles of individuals, right? So at the end of the day, when you're building out a user experience for a single farmer, you're building it out for a single person, and therefore, that is translatable up, but it's not necessarily translatable to build for a large company and then try and have a small holding farmer or an SME use that software. And also the unit economics of the sale model probably don't translate that well either. So the niche for us at the moment, it depends upon the market. So we've started in Australia, obviously that's our home territory. And the way that the market evolved in Australia was to have networks that were hub and spoke networks from traders and from storage operators. And so primarily we began Agridigital by bringing storage operators, or BHCs, bulk handling organisations, silo operators, if you will, onto the platform. And they brought farmers and they also brought traders, because traders post their prices. They bid at those storage networks. That's America, where site operators or elevators tend to also be traders, because it's become much more verticalized, I guess, with the large players, the ABCDs, as they call them. So that's ADM, Bunge, Cargill, Dreyfus. controlling a lot of the supply chain and also that interface to the farmer. And that's not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with being a large player. This is not saying that there's no role for those large players. Indeed, there is. If you have a look at how much grain is produced globally, or food just generally, we need those large players to come in and support our supply chains and build out long positions of commodity goods and be able to feed the commodity into the market over time. So there's actually a very important role that they play. But that role can also be played to a certain extent by small to medium enterprise. But it can't be if they don't understand the supply chain, if they don't know who comes before them, who comes after them, if they don't have access to data, if the supply chains become so large and so complicated that it requires huge amounts of capital in order to participate. And that's what concerned us.
Do you know, and it's so important when we talked about touched on liquidity earlier on, and that's obviously my background with derivatives and trading and execution, and access to reliable, transparent data is key to be able to trade in those markets. And so, can you give us a sense? I want to get into the tech in a little minute, but just what kind of data are you collecting along this value chain right now, and how is this available in disaggregated form elsewhere, or is this the first time anyone's really brought this kind of data together?
So supply chains classically fragmented, and there are pools of this data that exist in multiple forms, validated and unvalidated across the globe. But I guess this is one of the first attempts to bring end-to-end supply chain into one platform and look at the ways in which we can then leverage that data set to perhaps reprice risk or to build different types of financial products. So it's the aggregation of the data. It's the long-term vision of building out end-to-end and to be able to store and to be able to hold on to and to mine data over very long periods so that we can understand years and years worth of data rather than just one season's worth of data. And to be able to put that at the service of the user, not just of the platform. So, we have things that we want to be able to do with that data because we think we can make grain supply chains safer and more secure and easier to use. But we also recognise that our users will want to use this data in different ways as well. And so it's been able to bring that data back up to the level of the user so that they can get the insights that they need in order to run their businesses. I think the other thing to remember is that, and this harks back to competitive, versus collaborative type mindset, data has really been seen as something not to be shared, but to be really hoarded and used for your own advantage. Indeed, it's hard to think. I mean, it's synonymous with trading markets, right? The trading advantage is an information arbitrage. That is, I know something that you don't, and that makes me more powerful or able to act in a different way, in a more profitable way in the market. And I guess what we're proposing is not that we upend the trading model, but that we have a look at the way in which data can be used in a more collaborative way to create broader signals across the market so we get a more efficient market. And out of that, we will probably build different trading models over time.
And my mind is whirring, having been involved in product development at a number of exchanges globally over the years. My mind is whirring with the possibilities as far as turning out indices and other data points around tradable products going forward. Just fantastic.
That's so right, Kathy. Sorry to interrupt. I think that's one of the ideas of building out, and this is, this is a technology point, I suppose, but building out a platform rather than just a piece of software is that we don't have all the answers. We don't have all the product ideas. But as we're aggregating this data, and we take over, to think about it, we take over from the moment that a product has been harvested. So the moment an asset has been created. And then we start aggregating data all the way through to the point of consumption and beyond, because sometimes payment and the completion of contractual and other financial obligations actually postdates consumption, which is one of the risks that exists in supply chains. So, we can see that we're not going to have all the great ideas, and the idea of being able to build a platform technology is so that others can build on top of us over time and indeed bring those great ideas to fruition.
Brilliant. I've got a few people I need to introduce to you then going forward. Look, you've mentioned we a couple of times, and I know you've got a couple of co-founders. I also know this is your third AgTech business. So it'd be good just for the audience out there, especially those who are founders and starting up, especially if they're in regional areas. What are some of the big lessons you've learned from your previous two enterprises, for instance? And I know you have a broader career than those three enterprises. And what are those lessons and how they impacted how you've gone about bringing Agridigital to market?
Yeah, so I think I actually started off my career as a lawyer and never would have thought that I would have ended up where I am. And so that's probably lesson number one, to be flexible and to take opportunity as it comes along, because I've certainly done that. And perhaps a few people have said to me how well I organise my career, and really it's been much more serendipitous than that. I think I've just, I'm a bit of an opportunist. And I also, enjoy working with people who are passionate about the same things I'm passionate about. So, that's kind of why I've gravitated to my two founders, because my other co-founders, because we've all worked together in these other businesses that you're alluding to. In the previous businesses, what we did learn, and in one in particular, we had to build out our own technology because there was nothing good out there in the sector that enabled us to do what we did. And we were an agricultural and grower services business by and large. And so I learned, I guess I've learned, technology from the ground up. I'm not a schooled technologist. I'm really a domain expert who has then started to look at ways in which we can apply technology to the domain. And I think there are certain industries and domains that really lend themselves to that approach. It's not every domain, but agriculture is one of them. And I think supply chain more broadly is another, where it takes so long. You really do have to do your 10,000 hours of grain or, of supply chain to really understand how these markets work, right? You've been there. I think you said you've got a career of 33, plus years. And it's not one particular job. It's the aggregation of all of that effort and the networks that you've made along the way, that put you in such a good position now. And that's really the case for us as well. So I think in together to start Agridigital, it's a bit right time, right place, and we've just done the hours that were required. I guess the other lesson that, I've learned over time is that nothing is really unique either. So, there's markets and markets, supply chains are supply chains to a certain extent, farmers are farmers. And we shouldn't really get too obsessed with the fact that our market's different or our industry is different. There are really threads that run through every single industry, and it's honing in on those threads that I think enables a product to scale, not building out just for the industry that you know. And I think good founders seize on those threads, and that's what they build their business around. As the silver kind of thread that runs through everything, not just the opportunity that presents itself.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you had a diverse professional career, and you came from being a full-time practicing city lawyer to the country. So your journey's it's reasonably unique, although there are many people who've made that move either through marriage or otherwise. And I just think you're touching on a very interesting point there, because not everybody has access to the same networks in the city, perhaps, that you brought with you to the country. So I'd be really interested. So that move for you has been obviously brilliant, and you've got these new out of it. But for those that are kind of born and bred in the country and don't have those necessary city connections, particularly when it comes to accessing capital, I'm thinking of startups right now, right? You might be able to seed the business, but there's that sort of fintech valley of death, if you like, between bootstrapping an early seed and then getting into your Series A, where you've got some serious investors on your balance sheet, which you do. So is there any, just looking from where you are now and where you've come from with the other two businesses, is there any advice you'd offer to people in startups about what they should be doing and could be doing to get to the stage where you are if they don't have those networks?
Well, I think networks are you either really enjoy building them or you don't. And if you do, I think this is people who really love connecting with others, and so that makes it a lot easier. Now, if that's not you and that doesn't sound like you, then one good possible option is to have a look for a co-founder who's similarly passionate about the problem space you want to solve for, but actually is does like building networks and does like being able to extend themselves in that way. And that might be a match made in heaven, because I do think those networks are important. But they're not the be-all and the end-all, because there are also really sizable aggregators of networks out there now that can make that kind of phase of meeting and sharing what you do so much easier. And Fintech Australia is one of them. I mean, they're obviously sponsoring today, and it would be remiss of me not to mention them. But the reason I do that is because I didn't have a fintech background, and I threw myself into that industry to understand it more, and was really welcomed. I mean, I came from ag into fintech, started explaining what I saw the ag problems were, and realizing they were also fintech problems. And so in being able to access expertise in the community, I was able to bring that back to Agridigital, and that was really helpful. So I think that there's there's the Fintech Australias out there, InsurTech Australia and others. It depends upon your problem space. But there's also increasingly now a number of regional accelerators, hubs and innovation precincts across rural Australia, which is really exciting. They actually weren't there 5 years ago, or very few of them anyway, when we started out. And, I think that's really encouraging. There's a number of programs such as Farmers to Founders. So, basically saying that farmers are founders too, and we know how innovative farmers are. I mean, that's just the hallmark of being a farmer almost. So I think we're starting to celebrate innovation in all its forms, and that's really encouraging. And by being able to sometimes adopt, I guess, the city tropes of innovation, but bring those to the bush, it actually enables those in the bush to be able to talk the same language. And that's sometimes where we have felt, I guess, separate, or, maybe even not good enough sometimes, is that we didn't really necessarily have the lingo. And we all know that lingo is important. And that really just helps break through the barriers. So I think now, that's, that is happening. One area, Kathy, which is just so basic, but connectivity. I mean, I know that I can see, I've got a very green today, and I'm actually in Sydney, but, connectivity in the bush. If we want to have rural and regional innovation, if we want to be able to elevate the wealth of knowledge and expertise and innovation that does exist in our rural and regional areas, we need to have better connectivity than what we do. And I think COVID has also highlighted that. Talent exists everywhere, but it cannot find its true exposition unless we can connect everybody.
Yes, I think there'll be a load of people that we can't see nodding along to that. We spoke last week about living in the bush and that the extraordinary amount of latent talent there, especially female talent, whether they've moved there from the city through marriage or whatever it is. And a lot of my old friends from the trading floor, for instance, who went back to family farms and are now farmers out there. And how do you activate that talent outside of their day-to-day focus of farming? And with the current COVID-19 pandemic, it's really forced us all to reimagine about how we go about our day-to-day lives. And with work, we're seeing a really strong trend. Even where I am, I'm 2 hours south of Sydney on the south coast, but we're seeing a really strong trend for people to move out of the larger cities and embedding that work from home concept into their day-to-day. I sit on several boards that I've never met some of the people because they're recent appointments in the last 6 months, and I haven't been able to travel interstate because of COVID. I know, so there's kind of several questions around this, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on both the talent versus location question and how you see that evolving going forward, and sort of the longer-term impact on COVID-19 on work practices, particularly as it pertains to sort of benefiting people in the bush.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the talent over location, I do think that's going to be a growing theme over time, and that does for Australia. So it's not just for the bush, it's actually for accessing global talent and being able to activate and mobilise that talent. Now, I think that's a slightly different question, the mobilisation of that talent and what we have to do in order to create supporting infrastructure around continued mobilisation rather than just saying the talent exists. But the talent definitely is there, absolutely. So social media has actually been fantastic for connecting a lot of people across rural and regional Australia, so that the conversations that are, I guess, the genesis of many great ideas, or at least the genesis of people coming together and agreeing that there's a real problem that needs to be solved, definitely that is happening. I think that in terms of, what else we might see happen over time, I'm always a bit wary of my crystal ball. It hasn't been good. Everybody knows that I said that we'd all be using blockchain, come 2020, and well, we've got a roadmap, so that's a national roadmap. It's a good start. But so my crystal ball sometimes needs a bit of polishing, but I do think that there is that many people are going to see value in being able to live where they choose to live and be able to carry out really fulfilling careers from wherever they choose to be based. And therefore, as leaders, and many people on this call or dialing in today are probably leaders of businesses, or in very senior positions in businesses, and it's on us to start working this out. I don't think the answers are there yet. At Agridigital, we've actually given ourselves 12 months just to work out what is an office for these days. Like, why do we even need an office, and what do we do in an office that is different? Because it's not about tasks, because we can do tasks, at home. We've proven that. So why do we come to an office? And I certainly don't have the answers, but I do know, and COVID-19 taught me this very early on, when we put in place our new plan for the year back in March of this year. It seems like, 100 dog years ago. But what I did learn was that we need to source these answers together. So we need to be bringing teams together. It's actually not just about the leadership having the answers or, doing the execution. I actually think this is a whole of team and a whole of company effort. And the only way we're going to get really good work from home or flexible working and remote working arrangements is if we're having a really, fruitful conversation across the company, across society. And, certainly my team are telling me that they don't want to come to the office full time anymore, that they value some of that time at home. They certainly value not having to do a commute. And, that this has been given them a different perspective in how that they can do their work and progress. But what's not clear is what sort of relationship do they have with their peers? How do they, deepen that relationship? We're certainly that. In some ways, I wish this was open forum where we could, get the wisdom from everyone on the call. Are you seeing anything else out there, Kathy, in terms of, innovative ideas and ways of coming together and having that conversation?
So it's a good question. Yes and no. So I think the whole collaboration piece, thank goodness we've got Zoom, right? So it enabled us to kind of click into remote working in a more effective way than if we didn't have those kind of shared type structures. But I think you've touched on something there, that socializing aspect, and while it is good to sit in your home and have those conversations, sometimes just sitting face to face and shooting the breeze about a range of things does flare up ideas and conversations and discussion and sometimes debate and dissent. And I think those things are the things that are missing at the moment, because it's quite structured, and we've got our half an hour or however long it is to kind of get through some things, and then we turn off and go back to what we're trying to do, sitting in whatever environment we're sitting in. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there for improving that. But I think connectivity, as you said, a real issue if you're outside of the big cities or even inside some of the cities. I'm lucky where I am. We were the first to get NBN down here, so we've got fibre right into the home, and even then we struggle sometimes. Just one more thing I would add on that conversation around networks too. I've recently joined a group called Inspiring Rare Birds, and it's a networking group, and they started off focused on young women, and especially with in regional areas or from disadvantaged backgrounds or migrant backgrounds who haven't a great idea of business to market. And it's a mentoring program. So it's expanded now. There are male mentees on there as well. And I'm kicking off my first one tomorrow with a young woman in the far north of New South Wales who's created a fantastic index that's tracking how women's success as far as work is concerned, called Financing. So it's they've got a funding grant, Rare Birds, from the Office of Women and a scholarship. So it's very worthwhile looking for things like that too, that can help you step outside your immediate network that you have access to. Emma, I'm just conscious we've got just 10 minutes left. I think a lot of people are going to want to really talk about the tech. So Agridigital is where AgTech meets FinTech, right? And I'm sure the listeners will be very interested in some of the detail underlying technology. Many will understand blockchain, many won't. And, transparency and simplicity are two of the key benefits. And I actually sit on the board and chair a board for a startup that uses smart contracts and blockchain technology in PropTech, in the property space. And having come from capital markets where I'm from, we spent a lot of time, especially in Europe, where we had some big conglomerates come together to look at the uses of blockchain for things like custody and settlement, for instance. So could you kind of drill down into how this technology works for you, the platform, from both a farmer's and consumer's perspective? And in light of developments we're all aware of in AI and edge computing, 5G, the cloud, etc., where do you see your use of this innovative tech going in the short to medium term, not just for your business, but actually for agribusinesses more broadly?
Yeah, thanks very much, Kathy. I think when thinking about blockchain, I'm a real blockchain pragmatist rather than an evangelist. For us, we really have a look at what are the tools in the toolkit that we have available in order to solve the problem. And so in some ways, and many times I go through whole conversations without ever mentioning the B word because it just isn't actually relevant to the subject matter. So we're not looking for ways to use blockchain, first of all. We're really looking for ways to solve a problem. And sometimes blockchain, appears to be the best technology. And one of the ways in which we do use blockchain at Agridigital is in our finance business. So we're very concerned to be able to, because we want to bring in new sources of capital that haven't come into this supply chain financing sector before, and we want supply chain to be seen as an asset class in and of itself. And the asset is really the way that we're representing the underlying physical assets that are moving through the supply chain and collateralizing those and funding those assets. So the way that we use blockchain is actually to create digital asset versions of the physical asset for the purposes of finance. But it's not restricted to finance, because once you actually tokenize an asset, you can actually obviously record a whole lot of data about that particular asset. And, one of the ways that I do think we'll see blockchain evolve over time, or certainly digital assets evolve time, is as effectively repositories of information that tell us things about the real world object that we couldn't know just by looking at or transacting with the real world object. So, there are certain, in the case of agriculture, there is definitely production history, for example. All of the records of storage and movement. In terms of financing, it's ensuring that a good that you are now financing or perhaps taking legal possession of, actually is unencumbered, and there is no other financing. These things are not actually easy to do. There are multiple registries that do exist, but they're not necessarily all complied with. So there can be a number of different pitfalls when looking at financing physical assets in this space, particularly because some of the financial arrangements can really, be quite archaic in some ways. They can also be quite casual. So, not everything is financed the way that a bank might finance an asset, and that would be relatively transparent. Normally, they would put that on at least, they do a PPSR registration. So there's a number of different ways in which blockchain can be used. The preference for us is at the moment to build out the digital asset capability. so that we can then have a host of smart contracts that we run across the top, which actually effectively execute workflows. So then we start moving into automation of workflows and being able to have a look at logic, which could be atomic by construction rather than sequential, as has been, traditionally built out across supply chain and across financial services. And this really then speeds up and creates efficiency and reduces cost in terms of financing the assets. So, that's really our interest, and I think that interest will only grow, for us, but also for others over time. I can also see, maybe it's some way into the future, but we're investigating this ourselves, is actually opening up the digital asset registry to farmers directly so that they can actually have control of their data. And so when a digital asset is created in Agridigital, they will be able to, the farmer that is, would be able to add other data to that digital asset and be able to permission others in to use that data over time. So this then becomes a data sovereignty issue as well, which is why we really looked at blockchain to begin with, because we could see that it could solve multiple problems with one underlying technology. And we actually liked, often you don't say flexibility with blockchain, but there are elements of flexibility in terms of the way that you can build out your use of blockchain that I think are really exciting for what we're doing. I might pull it up there just in case you've got another question and we need to get some thanks or other aspects in, but I could talk for a long time on blockchain. I should just say one more thing. The other really interesting area is obviously the advent of DeFi. And so decentralized finance, and the way that we could actually access and bring in alternative sources of finance through the use of DeFi, collateralizing physical assets, potentially being able to use stable coins as well as part of that structure. So I think there's actually a lot happening at the moment, and probably still a lot of experimentation in the DeFi space when it comes to physical world assets. But we're certainly looking at what's been happening in crypto collateralization and stable coins, and looking at what the lessons would be for the physical.
Look, and it's quite right to do that. If you've been tracking what central banks are doing with digital currencies, and that digitization of real assets has been a theme for quite some time, especially living in the UK like I have for the last 18 years, it's been a real theme. We adopted a lot of those kind of technologies very early. So corporate bonds, fine art, property, things like really fractionalising the ownership of some of those assets. And of course here the ASX has been a real leader globally and invested a lot of time and a lot of money, and continues to do so around that digitisation of the post-trade piece in clearing and settlement. It's great to hear people like...
Yeah, no, it is really exciting, isn't it? And I think, when we think about particular problems that exist in agriculture and commodities markets, one of the large problems is the commingling of assets. So there is no separate identification of that asset anymore once it's commingled. And therefore, the case for real-time payment is very acute. And, therefore, we do need to have a look at how we move beyond just digital payments or e-payments to have a look at the way in which we can actually execute real-time payment. And in some cases, we will need programmable money in order to do that.
Yeah. Look, I know we could talk a lot about this. I wish we had a whole session just on the tech. We've got a minute and a half. Just we'll step back up, bit of blue sky, big picture. We've got plant-based diets becoming a trend, climate change, all sorts of people wanting to know the provenance of where their food's coming from. Quick, your view, nationally, internationally. What do you see the major trends and challenges in the agri and agri-tech ecosystem?
Okay, so major trend is we're going to see continued digitisation of agriculture and into the food system, and therefore we're going to see an elevation and an increase in the number of digital products that are going to come into the sector. So that's good news for companies like ours, but it also means that there's going to be a lot of competition out there over time. When there's competition, there normally is some form of consolidation at some point. So I actually think we will see a small wave of early stage consolidation across the digital ag tech space in the next kind of 5 to 7 years as well. with some early winners, probably looking to acquire the technology of some emerging startups. So that's going to be exciting. It's going to be a really great space to watch. I think from an Australian perspective, we need to really shift the conversation away from production economics to the exporting of technology, not just exporting physical goods, but how we actually export technology. And until we're having that conversation, we're not going to really have the success that we should have as a nation and leverage our position.
You've just hit on what's been my major theme to all the responses to Senate inquiries, etc. Look, Emma, thank you so much. I absolutely applaud the work you're doing and people like Katrina Donaghy in water with blockchain and assets. There's a number of you out there doing real work, and thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, everyone.